This Bible is older than the Bible that we know today, and it has way more books. Now, a lot of people don't actually know this, but there's actually a version of the Bible that exists that predates the King James Version by roughly around 800 years. And that Bible is the Ethiopian Bible. Now, unlike the King James Version, which contains 66 books, the Ethiopian Bible contains 84 books. The Ethiopian Bible contains 4 of the Gospels in the New Testament, and also includes books that were not included in the King James Version of the Bible. Now, just some of these books include the Book of Enoch, Baruch, Esdras, and the 3 books of Maccabee. Now, these books may sound new to you, which raises the question, why are these books not included in the versions of the Bible that we read today? Now, it's a common misconception that random books were selected to go into the Bible, but it's actually a bit deeper than that. A lot of it has to do with something known as the Council of Jamina.
Most people have no idea that one of the most important events in Christian history was more political than divine. In 325 AD, Emperor Constantine called together over 300 bishops and scholars for what became known as the Council of Nicaea. His empire was fracturing under religious disputes, and he needed one unified version of the truth to bring order. At the council, they didn't just debate theology, they decided the fate of spiritual history. Was Jesus divine, human, or both? Which books truly belonged in the Bible? What are they truly hiding? What should be labeled heresy and buried forever? Gospels like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and even the Gospel of Judas were excluded. Some say not because they were false, but because they gave too much spiritual power back to the individual. The version of Christianity that emerged wasn't just a religion, it was a tool of empire. The council declared Jesus fully divine and fully human, and anything that didn't fit that narrative was destroyed, hidden, or outlawed. What we now know as the New Testament was shaped in that meeting. Not by divine revelation, but by vote. Many believe this moment was the beginning of a controlled narrative, where spiritual mystery was replaced with dogma, and the sacred feminine and mystical teachings were erased. Some say if those lost texts had survived, Christianity might look very different today. More esoteric, more personal, and more empowering. So the question remains, was the Council of Nicaea protecting the truth or rewriting it?
The white nationalists pushed Christianity down your throat.
Christianity was in Africa before Europe. Whoa, did you hear that? The Ethiopian Bible is older than the King James Bible. Thank you. That's exactly right. The argument that colonialism brought Christianity to Africa is completely wrong. Why is it completely wrong? Because Christianity was already in Africa before Europe. Christianity was in Africa before Europe. And one thing you need to know is that Christianity is not a European religion. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
They didn't bring Christianity to Africa, they brought edits. Before Europe ever touched the Bible, Ethiopia already had it.
I'm gonna be honest, man. Black people, shut up. Just shut up. I'm gonna do a shout out right now to a brother that died too early. I hear he died at 46. I wasn't around, and I guess they couldn't get in contact with me. But one lesson the guy that really provoked me to study the Bible taught me was that if you don't know what the fuck you talking about, shut up and study. We studied for hours and days, right? Stop hearing what these people are teaching you and running with it. The Bible was not in Ethiopia before that. That's not what anybody said. It's the oldest, most original, what was found.
No, the Ethiopian Bible was not written by a black man. It was written by a Roman man. A Roman man by the name of Abba Garima. This band kidnapped an Ethiopian boy on a voyage to the kingdom of Aksum. The Bible don't talk about hair of wool for no reason. Then when he arrived, he told them how he had a prophecy and he had 24 hours to write it out. Mind you, the Romans and Greeks have big beef with the Ethiopians because they were the first dynasty of Egypt, the Scorpion King, Narmer. Like they got big beef. Like at that time, the richest people in the world. You know, you had Genghis Khan, you had Greek leaders, and you had African leaders, Chinese. It was crazy at this time. At this time, anybody could be a king. Anybody could be a leader. All you need is money and a good fairy tale, and you are able to be a king and a leader. I know y'all heard the stories about Christians being fed to lions, but listen to the first Christian Bible.
And it's something for folks to think about. And you say this is from a Bible. Therefore, it must be Canaan, your firstborn, whom they enslaved. And I'm just starting in the kind of the middle because there's a lot of it here. And since you have disabled me, doing ugly things in blackness of night, Canaan's children shall be born ugly and black. Moreover, because you twisted your head around to see my nakedness, your grandchildren's hair shall be twisted into kinks, and their eyes red. Again, because your lips jested at my misfortune, theirs shall swell. And because you neglected my nakedness, they shall go naked. And the rest of this stuff is underlined, and this is a quote from the book.
So Apagrima kidnaps a little Ethiopian boy, says, hey, you're going to be my slave, but not only are you going to be my slave, you're going to be my assistant. You're going to be my first bishop. I have a prophecy from everything that I've learned here in Africa, and I'm going to write it out into a book. He writes the Ethiopian Bible. And his first bishop, his first prodigy is Saint Frumentus, the hair of wool. This man, Saint Ethiopians are not only, they're African, but they're a mixture of Middle Eastern. They have Jewish blood. Israel is where it used to be in Africa. If you look at the old maps, Israel used to be in Africa. Like, so the Bible's literally talking. This man was described for Saint Frumentus was literally adding himself to the Bible, to this guy's writing. Dead ass. I kid you not. But they don't teach you this in high school, because high school is so you can get into the work field, and college is so I think you can really better yourself. You know, when I said that taking a DNA test is so important, I definitely recommend it, because like we're all being lied to, people. So when Europeans got word that Africans were converting into Christianity, they're like, yo, we took over Africa. We're going to split this motherfucker up. But anyway, let's go back in time to this motherfucker, Christopher Columbus, who did not discover America first. He came to North America, but he didn't discover it. He wasn't the first pirate, like, for fuck's sake. And did you know Christopher Columbus was Italian? I kid you not, bro. He's Italian, bro. He's an Italian, bro. Hey, if we got beef with anybody. But he also used Christianity as a way to take over the Caribbeans. Everywhere he went, he used religion as a form of manipulation. As did all European settlers who came across dark people. They would use the Bible as a way to get what they wanted out of them. You think Tall, Dark, and Handsome is really about a black man, or really it's about an olive man, a man that's Italian. Europeans knew to burn books, burn education. They knew to do all this. So the Europeans is working together. They got their boats. They're like, this book says we can have black slaves. And, you know, they get slaves from all across the world. They bring them to the Caribbean islands. They bring a slave that knows about the Saint Frumentus. And this is why you see Jamaicans talking about Jah. Praise Jah. They are literally talking about the first bishop. They don't know what white man that the Christians is talking about, but they're talking about the first bishop. They're like, yeah, we know who he was, but he was just a saint. He wasn't born from a virgin. And he was also taught everything. Like, it's crazy. The real truth to it is really dark, and they don't teach you this unless you go to college, but you can look it up on your own. Thanks for watching.
Why do Jamaicans say Jah? You might have seen or heard, but where does it come from? Jah is the shortened form of Jehovah, or the name of the Most High Almighty God. It is the abbreviation of the Hebrew Yahweh, so Yah is also used as well as an abbreviation. In Jamaican history, Rastafarians have had a lot of links to Judaism since around the 1930s. They've adopted various elements, and it's very evident in the Rastafarian culture and also in the music, some of which follow Hebrew scriptures, or they also follow the Bible, or their own alternative scriptures. They follow dietary restrictions, similar to Jewish kosher laws. They abstain from alcohol and other things that are unnatural, which is why they have a very earthy aesthetic, and they're seen to be hyper-conscious of health. They also often reference Zion, Judah, and Babylon, and this is very prevalent in their ideology and in their music. Here are the sources I used, and I would love to know what you all think, and I hope you liked this little history lesson. Bye, loves.
Aside from being arrested by the American government once for, doing commie things and staging these sorts of riots, he also called for the genocide of Rastafarians. Look at this headline. This is a headline of somebody going back and revisiting. Bring in all Rastas, dead or alive. Now, if you're American, you don't know much about what a Rastafarian is. You do know who Bob Marley is. Bob Marley is hate rate Rastafarian. You probably have a depiction probably of just Bob Marley. Like, oh, they smoked pot. Yeah, well, in reality, they were like this religious, socio-political movement of, you had Africans who, after being enslaved, really thought that their enslavement was intentional. Many people who believe this today, that they came from Ethiopia. They were actually incredibly peaceful. They came from Ethiopia, and they felt that they were the people that were being spoken about in the Bible. They were the people that were being spoken about in the Bible, and that they were intentionally being, like, there was this intentional African diaspora all around the world to remove Black people from their roots. And so these people, this guy, he gets into power, and they actually were incredibly effective in Jamaica in terms of organizing for themselves. They lived in their own encampments, and they also had like agricultural unions. Like they were growing crops and things of their own, and so they were very well established all on their own. And what ended up happening was this guy essentially said that they were dangerous because 6 of them got into trouble. And he said, bring me all of the Rastafarians, dead or alive. And what ended up happening is they started rounding up Rastafarians. I'll actually read you specifically what happened to some of those Rastafarians on his call, because again, he was incredibly powerful. It says on April 12th, Good Friday, Prime Minister Alexander Bustamante, because again, he went on to become the prime minister, ordered the arrest of all Rastafarians that are alive. Police and military forces entered working class neighborhoods and Rastafarian encampments, detaining Rastafarians and forcibly cutting off their dreadlocks. Many Rastafarians were tortured and killed, with estimates suggesting that as many as 150 individuals were detained. So the reason that he ordered for them to even have their dreadlocks forcibly cut off is because it held spiritual meaning for them. Absolutely sick, absolutely disturbing, all of this true, and it's way worse if you look into this guy. I mean, there was like mysterious burnings of all of their crops, particularly when Winston Churchill was visiting. That's another rabbit hole you can jump down, but I wanted to just tell you who this guy was.
Study the history of the Ma'afa, the transatlantic slave trade. Many of those who were brought to Jamaica came from the Nigeria, Benin, Cameroon, Congo region. That is a very unapologetic fight to the death region. Some of the ethnic kingdoms in that region, the white man didn't even want to enslave them because it was too difficult to break them. Jamaicans still have that spirit. They are indomitable as a people. It's no coincidence that it was a Jamaican bookman who went to Haiti and led the Haitian Revolution. You understand? When you look at Nani, when you look at Cujo and Akangpong and all those revolutionary Jamaicans, it's no coincidence that they had so many revolutionaries on that island, because they brought that African spirit that can never be broken. And if African people are going to be free, geographically in the Caribbean or globally across the world, Jamaica will play a role in it. Just like when I go to Africa, I say it all the time. In order for Africa to be free, Nigeria will have to play a role in it because of their indomitable spirit. You can see that the Jamaicans and the Nigerians have the same blood. It's like, it's undeniable. So number one, that spirit of revolution. And then when you take the Rasta culture and what that did, and when you take Bob Marley's success and reggae and what that did, and of course the greatest Pan-Africanist and greatest organizer of all time, Marcus Garvey, you know, coming from Jamaica and others, you understand. But I think when you look at their national heroes and the Pan-African impact that they had, Bob Marley was a Pan-Africanist. The Rastafari are Pan-Africanists. Marcus Garvey, the father of modern Pan-Africanism. John Brown Russwurm, the revolutionaries that came over out of there. You know, even to the slave revolt leaders, you know, Sam Sharp, you know, Paul Bogle. When you look at the Pan-Africanist nature that is at the foundation of the revolutionary Jamaican spirit, it helps you to understand why they are so feared and loved around the world. You know, they're so unapologetic that when some people are trying to kick off revolutionary movements, if they're not sincere, they will scream for the Jamaicans. They want to make sure I don't have no Jamaicans in this, because I know when the Jamaicans come, they come to war. They come to fight. You don't invite the Jamaicans unless you're sincere. You understand? Because I would probably say per capita, you know, they're some of the greatest revolutionaries that the race has ever produced.
Wow.
Jesus was Ethiopian. Why do you think they're trying to stop kids from going to college and stop funding 2 colleges that teach this? I get it. That's a hard pill to swallow. You got white Jesus tattooed all over you and you didn't know that he was a black man and that his name was not Jesus. Let's start by his correct name, Frumentus. This is Saint Frumentus, an Ethiopian boy born in Tre, Lebanon. Saint Frumentus and his little brother were stolen by the Greek on a voyage to go see his mother. The Greek king made a promise with him that if he learned everything about Christianity, that he would free him when he turns of age, basically 18, that he can go back home. Unfortunately, the king died and his wife decided to keep Frumentus so he can teach the king's son everything about Christianity. Now that Frumentus has fully converted over to Christianity, he has a mission to return back to Africa, where he goes to the kingdom of Aksum. This is where he will begin to convert the pagan Ethiopians to Christian. People will tell you that Christianity was in Africa before the Europeans got there. Christianity was in Greece. It was in Greece. This man kidnapped Frumentus and taught him everything so he could return back to Africa and teach his people, converting everyone into Christianity. By doing so, Frumentus will go on to become the father of peace, the first bishop. The cross comes from Africa as a symbol of the crossroad. The Ankh was a symbol of transitioning into another life. As you can see in early Egypt, they passed the Ankh around. The cross comes from the Ankh. Most people forget this, but the Queen of Egypt, yes, Cleopatra, she was the last queen, but the last ruler was a white man, Caesar, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar will go on to hijack the cross and be a part of a propaganda to completely change the religion in Africa. Those 12 disciples all replaced from black to white. It's crazy how no church talks about this, but yet they claim to be real Christian. If you study any African spiritual book, the stories are almost identical to the ones that they put in the Bible. The cross has been a symbol in Africa for a very long time, centuries before Christianity was even introduced to Africa. So basically, Saint Frumentus was a pawn in the Europeans' game in order to convert all Africans into Christianity. The Europeans had an agenda and they needed to switch the reality of the African faith so they can look like the saviors. This is the reason why they used Frumentus as a pawn. Everyone had their own job. When the Arabics came around, the slavery in Africa became completely different, just like when the Europeans came around. You were still free if you were an African slave. You can still read, write, go home to your family, work for your kids. You were still free. When the Europeans came, they took all that away. Mind you, they tell you that Africa was under-evolved. Africa has one of the oldest schools for math, science. That school is still standing to this day, but yet they teach you that Africa was not evolved. The whitewashing of God's voice was the best thing that the Europeans can do. With Egypt being the heart of Africa and the last ruler of Africa being a white man, allowing the Arabics to come in and teach the Quran, which says you can do anything to your slave you can punish, rape, things of that nature. Changing the reality of what slaves were in Egypt allowed the history to be drowned and killed. The cross never represent heaven and hell. It represent us coming into reality, us being born. The crossroad from nothingness to existence. It never represented heaven and hell. But as you can see, they did a great job on changing the belief. But if you go to Africa, if you get involved, you will see the cross in multiple spiritualities outside of Christianity. Remember, the early Ethiopians were pagan. Egyptians were pagan. Because of this deep, dark history, you have the largest sex traffic ring in Sudan, in East Africa, because they know the origins of Christianity. It's something sick happening out there. Free Sudan. And if you want to see royalty, look at an Ethiopian. So there was a black man doing the work of a Greek man in Africa, and he was sought after to be punished because of his influence. So Frumentius was sought after because not only did he use the teachings from the Greek to create an Ethiopian Bible, but he added his own Psalms and Proverbs in there. He added his own scriptures in there, and the Greek did not like that. The Romans did not like that. This is why they will go on to go to the kingdom of Aksum and just burn all those books. The Ethiopians still have some sacred books, but it's not taught to real Christians as it should be. You guys are taught the whitewashed version, the version that the real Jesus never read. You guys are being taught the Negro Bible, a New Testament of the Negro Bible, which teaches white colonizers how to create a slave. It even teaches you how to make your slave forgive you for doing dark things to them. And as you can see, no one cares about slavery. Ifa is also one of the original 7 churches. So it's so much demonizing that's happening right now. And it's only because a lot of you didn't go to college. And as you can see, our president is trying to stop funding to colleges like Harvard, who is teaching theology, because of the rebellion you see in children nowadays, saying that they are agnostic, rather choosing to be Christian after learning the history of Christianity. This is the last relative to your saint, Frumentius of Ethiopia, Jesus Christ. This is him, the creator of the Ethiopian Bible, all those proverbs that they erased and was like, oh, it was a white man. It was an Ethiopian man. It was an Ethiopian man. Even Bob Marley was like, praise Jah. He knew that everybody knew that he came from Ethiopia, and it was forced onto them. So the revolutionary warning that an apocalypse is coming, the end of the world was coming, was actually for Africa. It was actually a prophet warning everyone in Africa that something dark is coming. It was for African people. And what happened? Slavery, guys. What happened? Technology, guys. The end of the world, we're waiting for Jesus to come. That was a message for the Africans. The end of the world, the apocalypse, was the white man coming to steal all their goods and rewriting their history. They replaced African saints with blonde-haired, blue-eyed men. They replaced African churches with demonic voodoo. They replaced it on purpose. The 7 godly churches before Christianity, the white man replaced. They needed to craft a gospel that flowed more north. As you can see, North Africa, Egypt, where Julius Caesar is now the ruler after killing Miss Cleopatra. Well, she killed herself, but after she died, he took over, and the Arabics were also invading, converting more Africans into the Quran. I feel like the Quran is no different than Christianity. The things align. They needed to convert the Africans into accepting slavery. The Quran proudly talks about slavery, just like the Bible. The cross represented faith in wherever you were going after life, that you were coming back. It was stolen from the Egyptian goddess. The culture has been demonized. The revolution in the Bible talks about the Europeans coming to Africa. Talks about the Europeans coming to Africa. It was warning the Africans of the apocalypse that was coming. The cross has nothing to do with heaven or hell. It's just faith that we go back to wherever created us. It was a protection that our ancestors used. It derived from the Ankh, the heart of Africa.
Ethiopia has black Jews. The origin of actually the black Jews is in Ethiopia. And then it's spurred off into this form of Christianity as well, where they actually have one of the most complete Bibles that exist. And they have the full book of Enoch in the Ethiopian Bible. It's the only Bible that has the book of Enoch in it. All of the Bibles around the world, the book of Enoch was left out.
That's the angels,
Azazel, all the fallen angels that came down and, they taught people how to, Azazel came down. So let me show you how to make these weapons right quick. Let me show you how to make a sword that'll slice a man's head off and make a shield that can repel any blade. I mean, this is craziness. But they have it in there. And you find out that these fallen angels, quote unquote aliens, come down on Earth and start engaging mankind in a way that sets us on this other trajectory, technologically, spiritually, and emotionally, and everything else. They literally violated like a prime directive to not engage. And they engaged, and because of that, they created a cargo cult here, where people are worshiping beings thinking that they were godly and everything else, but in the fact is they were just masquerading as gods.
Am I Egyptian? Are you Ethiopian? Are you Middle Eastern? Are you Greek? Why do you have a cross? It was only Ethiopia that adopted Christianity from Greece. And your so-called Jesus, if he's Middle Eastern, he's still not black. What's the difference from an Arabic invader and a European invader? What's the difference? You're talking about my Jesus isn't white. Your Jesus is still an invader. He's still an invader. Oh, and my bad. Let me take my blue contacts out, because apparently we can't dress up and drag or we can't dress the fuck up anymore. And apparently I gotta take the Nigerian flag out because you idiots don't take DNA tests. I can't be proudful with my DNA. Like, what's the difference between an Arabic invader and a European invader? And why are you wearing a cross on your neck if you're not Greek? You're not Ethiopian. Fuck is your problem?
Years old, his holy book. St. George slaying the dragon. Here is the Virgin Mary, the Black Madonna, Black Jesus. Yes. Later on, after division of Europeans, from black changed to white Virgin Mary. I can show you both painting it here inside. The original one is the black one. Yes. Black Jesus. How it was to read Giz, It was prayer for us, Abba. You can listen to him.
The Ethiopian Bible is one of the most mysterious and controversial books that ever existed. Even the country itself is shrouded in mysteries that can't be explained, but that's a story for another day. Ethiopia is home to one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and is the only country in Africa that was not colonized, and because of that, they can trace their lineage all the way back to Ham, one of the sons of Noah. This has even been collaborated with the Jews. But this video is not about the country itself, but about what the country possesses. Ethiopia has some of the oldest Bible scrolls that ever existed, even older than the famous KJV Bible. Other than the 66 books that make up the King James Bible, the Ethiopic Bible has 88 books and includes some works that other churches just don't have. The book has scrolls from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and scrolls that had never been seen before. And what makes this so interesting is that they had these scrolls long before Christianity first came to their society in the 4th century. In other words, Christianity wasn't a religion given to them like most nations. Christianity was already in Ethiopia. Since the 4th century, Ethiopia has been a nation of Christianity. Egyptian traveler, monk, and historian Cosmas Indicopleustes wrote that Ethiopia was a Christian country when he visited there in the middle of the 6th century. He saw how the rulers opened their borders to a lot of Christian refugees who fled to Ethiopia as they ran away from persecution from kingdoms and empires that were against Christianity. Certain Ethiopian tribes have been worshiping the Christian God for over 3,500 years. In such, the oldest organized Christian body in the world is not the Catholic ministry as many would have. You believe? but the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is locally known as Tewahdo in Ethiopia. The country also has one of the earliest illustrated Christian books ever found, which is a part of the Gospels written in Ge'ez, an old Ethiopian language, and was found in 2010 in a monastery on top of a mountain in Ethiopia. According to the Kebra Nagast, which is in Ethiopia's holy book, in the 10th century BC, an Ethiopian ruler and the famous biblical Queen of Sheba went to Jerusalem to ask the famous King Solomon for advice. It's even recorded in the acceptable Bible canon, but what the Bible didn't tell us is that the two rulers had a son together named Menelik. Queen Sheba took the boy back to Ethiopia and made him the first emperor. In 2012, experts looked at the genetic makeup of many Ethiopians and found some evidence to support Sheba's journey to Jerusalem and birth there. In such, it is believed that Egyptian, Israeli, or Syrian people may have mixed with the Ethiopian natives around 3,000 years ago, during the time when the queen is said to have ruled the kingdom of Sheba, collaborating the story even further. Despite having all these credentials and authenticity, the Ethiopian Bible is still discarded and not taken as part of the canon of the holy books. In fact, most people, including believers of the same faith, have never heard of the Ethiopian Bible. That's to show you the extent of what was done to discredit and hide the Ethiopian Bible. This begs to question, why? Well, to understand that, let's take a little history lesson. The Bible as we know it today wasn't actually how the Bible was in the past. There were many versions of different parts of the Bible, as well as many different interpretations and ideas of what the Bible was thought to be saying. As we all know, the Bible texts were originally written in Hebrew before being translated to other languages. The first translation was done by a man known as Saint Jerome from Hebrew to Latin. He was responsible for putting together what is known as the Vulgate around the year 400. And the Vulgate still remains the principal Latin version, or the translation of the Bible. It had 27 books called the New Testament and 39 books called the Old Testament. At that time, it was called the Hebrew Bible. You see, in the first century, many books were written about Jesus' life and teachings. However, many of them were not true. These were like fan fiction novels of the account of Jesus' life. The problem was that when these books were written and released to the public ended up believing those fan fiction books were actually real. There was no internet to quickly fact check these books, and as we know, fake news travels faster than real news. So you can only imagine the scores of fake books that were in society and the damage it did. This became a worry for leaders in the early Christian church. They met at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD and the First Council of Constantinople in 381 AD to choose which books would be added to the New Testament. They decided that a book was scripture if it was written by one of Jesus's followers or someone who saw him teach. The book also had to have been written in the first century and make sense with the rest of the Bible. There have been many changes to what we now call the Holy Bible, but the most important change may have happened during the reign of King James III. Despite the Vulgate existing for about 500 years, there were still numerous versions and accounts of the Bible, so much that it bothered the reigning monarch at that time. He was worried about the different Bible versions that were popular in the 1600s. The king wanted a version of the Bible that settled religious differences, as well as one that reinforced his power. Several priests also asked the king to make changes, saying that some of the translations that were going around were wrong. To solve this pressing issue, the king got 47 experts to look over all the different translations of the Bible that were already out there. They were split into 6 groups and worked on different parts of the project on their own for 7 years. These men had to follow strict rules so that they wouldn't show any bias. They also used a number of different tools to help them make a scientific Bible that stayed true to the original languages. When the priest and the king looked at the works of these experts and saw that they had similarities in their work, depth being far from each other, they approved it, giving glory to God for guiding them to arrive at the same conclusion. In 1611, the King James Bible was published, and because of advancements made in printing, it became one of the most accessible Bible versions to date. So these edits made in the King James Bible and the original Vulgate translation made by St. Jerome saw to it that some books were not included in the Bible most Christians have today, while the Ethiopian Bible still retains all scripture. Now that we've taken a short course on the Bible's history,
for over 2,000 years, the crucifixion has been the heartbeat of Christian theology. From the golden altars of European cathedrals to the wooden pulpits of black churches across the American South, we have been told, taught, preached, and made to feel that Jesus came into this world for one purpose: to die, to hang on a Roman cross, to bleed for our sins, to be broken so we could be made whole. But what if that isn't the full story? What if, high in the mist-covered mountains of Ethiopia, another version of Christ has endured, one untouched by Roman hands, unshaped by European doctrine, unchained from the narrative of blood and empire? According to ancient Ethiopian scrolls written in Ge'ez, the sacred language of one of the world's oldest Christian traditions, Jesus was never crucified. In this gospel, Yeshua does not hang on a cross. He walks into the wilderness, just like Moses before Pharaoh, just like Elijah fleeing Ahab. Like every prophet who chose truth over tyranny, he refused to be a pawn in the political theater of empire. This is not the Jesus of Roman suffering. This is the Jesus of divine sovereignty. He's not a victim. He's a master teacher, a healer, a guide, one who communes with the angels of air, fire, water, and earth, one who teaches fasting not as ritual, but as restoration, one who calls his disciples not to temples or thrones, but back to the sacred rhythms of creation. In the Ethiopian gospel of peace, Jesus is not slaughtered to satisfy wrath. He is sent to awaken humanity, to reveal that the kingdom of God is not found in death, but in alignment with the body, with the spirit, with the earth. Why does Ethiopia matter in the story of Jesus? Why should every black believer look toward the Horn of Africa, not Rome, not Jerusalem, when seeking the unfiltered truth of the gospel? Gospel of Peace is a call back to Eden, a reintroduction to the true mission of Christ, and a challenge to everything we've been taught to accept without question. So how did the Gospel of Peace, this ancient, earth-centered message of healing and harmony, vanish from the Western world? In the year 325 AD, under the iron rule of Emperor Constantine, the Council of Nicaea was convened. This was a political summit orchestrated to unify a divided empire under one religion, one creed, one version of Jesus. And they chose the suffering Savior, the crucified Lamb, the bloody sacrifice. Not because it was the whole truth, but because it was the most useful story. A Messiah who dies for you is easier to control than a master teacher who calls you to awaken the divine within. One inspires dependency, the other demands transformation. A Jesus who fasts in the wilderness, communes with creation, and teaches spiritual autonomy. That's a threat to empire. A Jesus nailed to a cross, silent and suffering, symbolic of obedience. That's a perfect tool for imperial religion. And so the Gospel of Peace was buried, labeled heresy, cast out of the official canon, erased from Europe, but not from Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Church, untouched by Roman politics and geographically isolated by God's design, never adopted Constantine's version of the gospel wholesale. Their monks continued to teach the story of Yeshua the healer, not as a tragic martyr, but as a living messenger who walked away from empire's reach. Many Ethiopian theologians believe the crucifixion narrative was never part of divine will. They call it what it became: political theater, imperial manipulation, a rumor turned into dogma, driven by fear, not faith. Rule, what then is the purpose of angels? If dust can be exalted, what becomes of light? And they listened. A third of the heavenly host, angels who once worshipped in perfect harmony, now turned away, not because they hated God, but because they could not accept his plan for mankind. This was a protest against divine purpose, a refusal to accept a future where humanity, flawed, fragile, and formed from dust, would walk in communion with the Creator. In the ancient Ethiopian tradition, Archangel Michael is not merely seen as a celestial warrior. He is much more. He is the enforcer of divine will, the guardian of God's vision for creation, and the defender of humanity's destiny. When Satnel rose in protest, questioning God's plan to exalt mankind, it was Michael who stood unwavering. He didn't just fight for heaven's stability, he fought for you, for the soul of man, for the breath of God placed in clay. Michael understood what Satnel refused to accept, that humility surpasses beauty, that obedience is stronger than intellect, and that the miracle of man, formed from dust yet crowned with divine breath, was a glory no angel should envy. His battle was not just with rebellious angels, but with the spirit of defiance that sought to tear heaven's design apart. And that battle still rages today, not only in the unseen realms, but within every heart wrestling with pride, purpose, and faith. That's why every year on Meskerem 12, Ethiopian Christians gather to honor Michael's triumph. They sing, they fast, they pray. Not just in remembrance, but in active alignment with the angel who chose God's will over self-glory. Michael didn't just win a war. He became a symbol, a reminder that faithfulness still has a voice, and that the divine design for humanity is still worth defending. But the story doesn't end with Satnel's rebellion. In the ancient book of Enoch, highly revered in Ethiopia and banned by the Western Church, we are introduced to a second group of heavenly beings who turned from their divine assignment, the Watchers. These angels were sent by God to observe, to guide, to rule. What then is the purpose of angels? What then is the purpose of angels? If dust can be exalted, what becomes of light? And they listened. A third of the heavenly host, angels who once worshipped in perfect harmony, now turned away, not because they hated God, but because they could not accept his plan for mankind. This was a protest against divine purpose, a refusal to accept a future where humanity, flawed, fragile, and formed from dust, would walk in communion with the Creator. In the ancient Ethiopian tradition, Archangel Michael is not merely seen as a celestial warrior. He is much more. He is the enforcer of divine will, the guardian of God's vision for creation, and the defender of humanity's destiny. When Satnel rose in protest, questioning God's plan to exalt mankind, it was Michael who stood unwavering. He didn't just fight for heaven's stability, he fought for you, for the soul of man, for the breath of God placed in clay. Michael understood what Satnel refused to accept, that humility surpasses beauty, that obedience is stronger than intellect, and that the miracle of man, formed from dust yet crowned with divine breath, was a glory no angel should envy. His battle was not just with rebellious angels, but with the spirit of defiance that sought to tear heaven's design apart. And that battle still rages today, not only in the unseen realms, but within every heart wrestling with pride, purpose, and faith. That's why every year on Meskerem 12, Ethiopian Christians gather to honor Michael's triumph. They sing, they fast, they pray. Not just in remembrance, but in active alignment with the angel who chose God's will over self-glory. Michael didn't just win a war. He became a symbol, a reminder that faithfulness still has a voice, and that the divine design for humanity is still worth defending. But the story doesn't end with Satnel's rebellion. In the ancient book of Enoch, highly revered in Ethiopia and banned by the Western Church, we are introduced to a second group of heavenly beings who turned from their divine assignment, the Watchers. These angels were sent by God to observe, to guide, that would bring unity, but not spiritual unity, political unity, imperial control. The King James Version became the weaponized word, edited, sanitized, and stripped of any text that could threaten the system. A gospel repackaged to bless slavery, white supremacy, and colonial conquest. But the Ethiopian Bible? It couldn't be tamed. It didn't bow to popes or kings. It was too black, too honest, too powerful. This sacred text spoke of black kings crowned with divine purpose, of Ethiopian queens anointed with wisdom, of prophets who looked like our ancestors and spoke with fire. It told stories of a people chosen not by Rome but by God, long before European missionaries ever touched African soil. And perhaps most threatening of all, The Ethiopian Bible boldly holds the tradition that the Ark of the Covenant, the very throne of God on earth, rests not in Rome, not in Jerusalem, but in Axum, Ethiopia. Let that settle in your soul. Because if the Ark is in Ethiopia, if the prophets were black, if the scriptures were preserved on African soil, then the center of divine history is not Europe, it's Africa. And that truth was too dangerous for empire. So they silenced it. But the silence is breaking, and the truth, our truth, is rising once again. Through Muslim invasions, Italian aggressions, and the brutal carve-up of Africa during the scramble for empire, Ethiopia stood tall, not just as a kingdom of resistance, but as a guardian of sacred flame. While foreign powers brought war and fire, Ethiopia sheltered something far greater than gold or oil. It protected the word of God, pure and untamed. High in its mountain monasteries, hidden from the greed of empire, monks and priests hand-wrote the Ethiopian Bible in the ancient tongue of Ge'ez, passing it down like sacred fire from one generation to the next. These weren't just scribes, they were warriors of the word, refusing to let divine truth be silenced. While the Western world painted Jesus as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed ruler fit for palaces and empires, Ethiopia painted him as he was, black, bold, and born among the oppressed. While Rome burned books, Ethiopia preserved scrolls. The word of God was edited, rebranded, and weaponized to serve empires. And with it, they spread a version of Christianity that erased the African roots of the faith.
So-called white people in America know a version of history. They know a story. They know a narrative that has been carefully crafted to shape how they see themselves, how they see their ancestors, how they see their nations and their place in the world, and how they see everyone else. And this ignorance, this deliberate miseducation that they have imposed upon their own people allows the same crimes to continue. What most white people in America and Europe believe about their history is not history at all. It's mythology, designed to produce a specific kind of person, a person who does not feel guilty, a person who does not feel accountable, a person who does not feel responsible for ever changing anything because they don't think they're doing anything wrong. They're taught that their ancestors were pioneers, their ancestors were explorers and builders of civilization, that they've brought progress and democracy and enlightenment to the world. They hear about the Renaissance, they hear about the Industrial Revolution, they hear about the Age of Discovery, and so forth and so on. And not about enslavement, not about genocide, not about the theft, not about the destruction that their people are responsible for. They're not taught that their prosperity was built on unimaginable suffering. They're not taught that their systems of government, their financial empires, their very sense of national identity are all rooted in exploitation. They don't know about the crimes. They don't know the real legacy of their people. And so they don't change. They don't have to change because they don't even realize what they need to correct. You know, when we look at colonialism, for example, the history that's taught in Western schools is usually an abstraction. Colonization is framed as something that it just sort of happened a long time ago, you know, something that was maybe unfortunate, but it was inevitable, and ultimately it represented progress, and there were many beneficial things to come from it. Never mind the millions of Africans who died in the Congo Free State under King Leopold. Most white Americans have never heard of them. Never mind the Bengal famine of 1943 when millions of Indians starved to death due to British policies. They don't even know about it. The fact that the American police forces evolved from slave patrols, they don't know about that either. And they're not any more informed about the ongoing crimes, like the pillage of African resources today, the economic neocolonialism that keeps entire regions of the world impoverished, the exploitation of labor in the global South. These aren't relics of history. That's the present day reality of what your people are doing. But the story that the white people are told does not include those realities, or else it packages those realities deceitfully and dishonestly. They packaged them dishonestly and deceitfully in the past just like they do now. The irony is that when they're confronted with the truth, many of these people will react defensively, you know. I didn't do that. That was in the past. Why should I feel guilty? But this reaction in and of itself reveals how little they're really understanding. It's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. You know, if a person inherits a stolen house, they may not have stolen it themselves, but they still live in it. And if they refuse to acknowledge where that house came from or how it came into their possession, if they insist that that house is rightfully theirs because the crime happened a long time ago, well, then they're complicit because the theft is ongoing. The crime never really stopped. So when people don't know their history, they cannot recognize when history is repeating itself and when history is actually just a continuum into the present. This is why so-called white people in America can watch their government arm and support genocide in Gaza, bomb Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and so on, and actually believe when they say it's for the purpose of security. They don't see the colonial mindset at work. That's why they can see corporations, for example, Western corporations, strip mine Africa for resources and not connect that to the centuries of plunder that came before, which just means that we're not even talking about past crimes. We're talking about ongoing crimes from the past until today. Like I said, it's a continuum. If there's ever going to be any real change, if there's ever going to be any hope for justice, then so-called white people have to actually learn your history. Not the history that makes you feel proud and makes you feel good, that makes you feel comfortable, but real history, the history that makes you uncomfortable, the history that you've denied all this time. And only when white people know their real history, really know it, then maybe they can begin to take the first steps towards repairing the damage that that history caused, the damage that it caused to millions upon millions of people all around the world, including themselves.